American military personnel in the Middle East since 9/11 is not a fair trade-off for the loss of nearly 3,000 American citizens, no matter how many Iraqi, Pakistani, and Afghan people are killed or displaced. What if we finally decide that torture, even if called enhanced interrogation technique, is self-destructive and produces no useful information, and that contracting it out to a third world nation is just as evil? What if it is finally realized that war and military spending is always destructive to the economy? What if all wartime spending is paid for through the deceitful and evil...
Thank you. I'm William Wagener, your host this evening for Take Back America, taking off my white hat for you people that tuned in. Now I want to introduce my guest that came 200 miles tonight from Orange County, California. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you.
Cindy Brown. And she got a story not quite as bad as Ted's. She hasn't been in jail. She's a 1988 gold medal Olympian. She's been here once before, and we've done 2 or 3 shows since she was here last. But what just happened to her, what just happened to Cindy, was so god-awful. I said to her right away, Cindy, they were trying to put you in jail. Cindy, tell us how this all came about. The judge, that crooked Judge Stafford, I didn't say Schmuck, Judge Stafford, I'm being respectful, Judge Stafford, who, if you sit in his court for very long, you'll think he's a white racist, but I'm not saying he's a white racist. I'm just saying you may think he's a white racist. Judge Stafford said, we won't let the sheriff exercise the eviction from your own house after your identity's been stolen, your cash bank account was stolen, your limo was stolen, your boat was stolen, because your ID was stolen. And I was with Cindy. One day we went to the sheriff of Orange County, and I'm listening as she's calling, what's her name, that little female cop you talked to. I can't remember her name now, Cindy. Do you remember her?
I believe, is it Michelle Lipton?
Not Michelle Lipton, it was a cop.
Alexander?
I think it was Officer Alexander. And she would not take a police report from Cindy. Although Cindy's got, I don't know if you can see it, stacks of evidence of fraud by the court, fraud on the court, fraud all through. And the sheriffs refused to take a police report. I was with her. I was a witness to that. And just, October 30th, 5 days ago?
Maybe 4 days ago.
4 days ago.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy. She was putting up $25,000 in cash. I mean cash, right?
Hard cash.
Hard cash, the stuff you put in your purse or wallet, not a certified check, actual cash. To the clerk. Tell the story, Cindy. Tell us what happened. You were doing it so they would hold the sheriff off from trying to evict you from your house. And then explain the trick they played on you.
Well, there's the summary judgment, which was not ruled in my favor. So what has happened is we had to motion for the court to give a stay of the appeal. So stay the execution of an eviction so that I could at least stay in the home where my computer and all the research, we can put everything together for the appeal. So the appeal actually is going to cost $25,000, which is absolutely egregious. It's very, very high and kind of unheard of. But needless to say, we did post that bail, and we did it in cash. And in doing that, the monies had to be deposited at the clerk's window inside the courthouse. We went to the clerk window to make the deposit, but there was an additional, I won't say it was a trick, but it was just something very different about how the deposit was being posted into the court.
I would say it was a trick. I would say that.
Okay.
You won't say it, but I'll say it.
It was interesting because we made the deposit, and what followed, what raised the flag. There was the IRS 8300 form that had to be filled out. And that 8300 form basically was an IRS report, which is procedurally correct. However, the form was pre-filled out by the court, which I didn't find out about until I got towards the latter part of the document, where the Superior Court of California Central Justice Center had their information and their employee EIN number, etc. But what was most appalling about this document, while they were filling it out, they had pre-checked in box 33, Bailey received by court clerks. Now, once I caught that, I immediately protested and said, I'm not signing this. I immediately knew to stop, that something was wrong with this document, because when you're a bailee, that means you've been criminally prosecuted.
Right, and here's one of the forms. You see $25,000, and that money probably went to, if you look near the top of the page, there's an LLC known as Zeev, Brogna, and Steele LLC, where they've sent multiple attorneys to appear, and I'm a witness to this. Multiple attorneys have appeared without giving a substitution of notice, so Cindy has no idea who she's up against when she walks into the court. And I've watched crooked Judge Stafford. Oh, I didn't mean to say crooked, did I? I guess I did. Stafford, he just says, well, I'm going to allow it. Well, I'm going to allow it. Well, they all know Cindy Brown's not substituting a different Cindy Brown, although there apparently was on the original fraudulent document something that said, Cindy Brown, I am a white woman, and I'm filling this form out, and the guy is signing it saying, I'm sitting next to Cindy Brown. She's a, quote, check it off, white woman. Now look at Cindy Brown. How white is this white?
Exactly.
Is this the new color of white? Then what am I? You know, our dead corpse?
The new shade of white.
The new shade. You know, the fraud is so overwhelming.
Very.
If I was this judge, I would have said, stop right there, Cindy Brown. It's obvious this is fraud. I am going to grant you a fee simple, absolute, exempting you for taxes. You don't even have to pay property taxes for 12 years, the length of time you've been put through all this hassle. Not only do you get your house free and clear, but now we're going to go after Craig Ronald Diamond, who started this whole shenanigan. I'm going to order the DA to issue a bench warrant for Craig Ronald Diamond and every assignee in the broken chain of chattel who touched this piece of paperwork. This has been an ongoing white-collar crime, just my opinion. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Cindy. I'm sorry. I get angry, and when I see good people, I mean, this woman isn't just a tall, black, beautiful woman. This woman represented we the people in Olympic contests, and even after that, she was shooting hoops representing America as part of the American basketball team. And she made a decent income. I mean, a much better income than I do. Or did. Here's the form, and on the back you can see it's signed in red ink by Angela, looked like Garrick, conforming on the back of this. And the front of it, it shows $25,000 in cash she put up. That's just so the court will wait while her federal case goes up on appeal. Go ahead, say. I'm sorry.
So the bond is in, everything's in place. It's on stay for the appeal, and depending on how the appeal goes, these monies will either be held in the trust. We did correct the issues with the 8300 form because I absolutely refused to sign it as a bailee because I'm not a criminal, and we amend it to undertaking on appeal. So if the appeal is lost, happens, these funds go to the Zave, Brodnick, and Steele and the Ryan firm.
Show the close-up of that checkbox. They had already checked off, or somebody had checked off for her. You see near the center bottom of the page there? See the check mark, and right above it, it says, on the thing that was crossed off, checked and crossed off, says bailee. That means you're bailing yourself out of jail, and this is just to stay out of jail. And if something doesn't work out, people, I've checked with two constitutional lawyers. One said she would be in jail probably within 48 hours if her appeal's denied. But even if her appeal was approved, there's a chance they'd say, well, we're forfeiting the bail anyway, and now unless you come up with whatever the balance, and they were claiming they wanted, what, 300,000 from you originally, or 400,000 or something, they would put her in jail anyway. Now, this is a constitutional attorney who said, please, Mr. Wagener, don't mention my name. I'm up in front of the appellate court right now, but don't mention my name. So she was smart. She saw that, and it's important that you know, when you go into Department 66 in Orange County in front of Judge Stafford, this guy, in my opinion, Cindy didn't say this, he talked to an attorney that comes in and watches his case. We know the name of this attorney. Do you want to give it out?
I think it's important that, we protect some of these. There's some really fine attorneys out there.
No, the court's attorney, the guy that was in the corner of the gallery that day when we were
Oh,
in there.
I can't even remember his full name.
Okay, you can't remember.
Yeah.
All right, I'm not going to mention his name, but I think he went from Judge Stafford down to the clerks and said, if by chance some woman should come up and want to post $25,000 and she's black and her name is Cindy Brown, have her check off bailee. Because then we can put her in jail. Once she's in jail, they can steal her house because she's not physically in possession. In possession, when I went to law school some years back, is 9/10. That's 90% of the law. She's been in possession all these 12 years. They've been saying, we own your house, get out of your house, we own your house. She's still in possession. That in itself shows an Olympian spirit to persevere against overwhelming odds. She's got the judge against her. She's got this whole LLC, and they keep rotating. How many different attorneys have they sent now? 8, 9, 10?
We've completely lost count of how many attorneys, because it seems like they've started out with 3, then they've come in with special appearing attorneys. I'd say we've probably gone through a good maybe 6 to 10 different attorneys.
Wow. Well, I know I've seen at least 3 that I can clearly recall. There was Clot and Mutt and Jeff, or Clot.
Michaelia, Leslie Clot.
Leslie Clot.
There's
there was
John Steele. There's Dennis O'Connell.
Yeah.
Then there's the new Timothy.
Wasn't Dennis
Ryan.
the one that tried to make a deal with you after court was over?
I think that was John Steele.
John Steele himself. Yeah, they play all kinds of tricks. So what Cindy's up against is not a level playing field, okay? She's used to playing on a flat level basketball court. What she's playing on now is a lopsided court where any move she makes, they say foul.
Yeah.
She makes a hoop, sinks it, they say, oh, that doesn't count. We weren't ready.
What they really didn't expect is for the people to read their own playbooks.
Yeah.
The playbooks are such in a court jargon that the average person can't really articulate, the language. But once we start figuring it out and we start, speaking in their language, they get really upset. So now we have to go to volume 2 of different plays, how we can, take back these homes.
So you're in front of Clerk Sarah at Orange County, turning in your 25. She goes back and gets supervising clerk, Margaret or Marjorie?
That's correct.
And they come up, and you give them this IRS code. Let's run those pages here one after the other. And they read what's here. And they come back and say, oops, who must file a Form 83? Oops.
Yeah, it was really interesting because during the entire protest, I just I said, why am I filing this and why am I signing this? I refuse to sign it and I will not sign it. And in fact, one of the clerks said, well, if you don't sign it, then we won't accept the transaction, which means I automatically would be evicted from my house. So I immediately stated, so you're going to not only extort from me, but you're going to blackmail me on a house for 1.7 because I won't sign my name to this and I'm not a bailee? I said, hold that thought. And I immediately called Franchise Tax Board to let them know what was going on. And upon me speaking with the Franchise Tax Board, they wanted to know what was going on and where was I.
And you laid your cell phone down in front of the clerk so she could see, right?
Absolutely.
She could see you were really talking to the...
Correct. And it immediately shifted, and one of the clerks went to the back room where I
Probably
assumed,
vomited. She probably vomited for a few minutes.
she came back and she said, "She's correct. Miss Brown's correct." And the whole game changed from that moment. But it's still not clear what they really were trying to do by filling out the form for me as a bailee, and not the money was sitting right on their desk. So they had
$25,000. You'd already counted it out for them, right?
No, they counted it. They
it.
counted it twice. They brought 4 different managers there at that same time. Well, if I'm not going to fill out the form, go ahead and slide that stack on back around the counter. That didn't happen. But they wanted to have the funds, get that signed, and that money would never be returned back to me, because as a bailee, that's just me being free.
I got
was
it.
the catch.
As soon as you told me, I instantly knew, because I've seen this happen to other people, and they never get the money back. So here's another thing. Bail received by the court clerks. See, Cindy had all this information. What made you know that you should bring all this paperwork with you and this code?
Actually, I didn't have this paperwork with me. They actually handed it to me along with the 8300 form. But I actually, while I was filling out the form, I immediately knew to read certain sections, because I've seen these forms before when I was in the pros. And so once I refreshed my memory on how to fill these forms out, I went straight to the area where it said bailee, and it immediately triggered to the offenses if you fill these documents out incorrectly. This is a felony.
Yeah, they're setting up you so that you would be claiming, I'm a felon, I've been convicted, and I'm posting bail.
That's correct.
People, this is evil. This is your supposedly elected we the people judges. No, they don't represent the people. These are not our Article 3 judges. Article 3 judges are supposed to be people like Cindy, me, you, who never went to law school. Let me point out, the First and Second Supreme Court of the United States, all those guys that were sitting on the Supreme Court of these United States back in the 1790s and the early 1810s, not one of those people had ever been an attorney. Not one of those people had ever been a member of a bar association. They were called lawyers because they were learned in the law. And one of them was in on the famous Madison versus Marbury case. That decision was earth-shaking and set precedent for centuries. Those guys had never gone to a formal law school, and they had not been approved by the Bar Association because the only bars were in London, England, and we wanted nothing to do with anything English. That's why we all dumped the tea and we're drinking coffee most places instead of tea these days. It all goes back to that time over 200 years ago. The Supreme Court had no bar-carded attorneys on it. Why do they think only attorneys that are bar-carded can sit on a court today? Because they've dumbed you down with fluoride in your water and brainwashed you. I'm sorry, I'm going to my soapbox again. I'm taking time away from Cindy. Go ahead, Cindy. We got a lot of pages.
So the 8300 form is really important to know when you're filling this out if you're doing a stay, because if you fill it out incorrectly, there's some serious offenses here that it states. Bail received by court clerks, any clerk of a federal or state court who receives more than $10,000 in cash as bail for an individual charged with any of the following criminal offenses must file Form 8300. Any federal offense involving a controlled substance, racketeering, money laundering, and state offense substantially similar to, and that's sections 1, 2, 3 above. Now, clearly enough, my bond had nothing to do with any of these things. In fact, it should have been Craig Diamond. He received $380,000. The question should be, did Craig Diamond ever fill out an 8300 form to the Franchise Tax Board or to the IRS?
We could subpoena that information or demand a freedom of information, couldn't we?
I think it just opened up a new can of worms. If I had to fill out this document, I think we should know, did Craig Diamond fill out one of these?
I doubt it.
And any of the other cashier's checks that were issued from escrow, was anyone else issued an 8300 form?
And if he did, if you do file a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, for those of you who just tuned in, we're with Cindy Brown, the 1988 gold medal Olympian, who's making an Olympic-style, highly focused fight to catch the criminals in Orange County that stole her ID, stole her house, technically stole her, but she's physically still in it, stole her yacht, her
Everything.
boat, her limo,
all assets,
cash out of the
stock
bank.
is gone. Everything's depleted.
And for some reason, the crooked district attorney of Orange County, whose name still is Tony Rakalkas, and the crooked sheriff, Mike Corona, who was sheriff during most of this early stuff, who went to prison, federal prison, didn't seem interested in getting a police report for Cindy and helping this woman who was a 1980 gold medalist and represented us for how many years in basketball shoots? What, 10 years or something?
A little under that, but I've played on all the national teams and then doing the prep to get to the Olympics. So there's a long, journey to becoming an Olympian.
Yeah, she didn't get the limo in any illegal way, is what I want to make clear. She worked for it. She shot hoops away from America, away from her friends, away from her mother and her family, going around the world. And this is how we treat her? Somebody break my leg or tell me we're still in America, because this doesn't feel like the America I thought I grew up in. Anyway, I keep interrupting you. Go ahead, Cindy. I know we got a lot to get through here.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to mention, I think we were talking about opening up a new can of worms with the 8300 form, because the question is did Craig Ronald Diamond fill out an 8300 form? Because this form says anything over 10,000. Well, we know Craig Diamond was issued a desist and refrain order from the business oversight because he was creating fraudulent and forged instruments. So he's well over 25 or 10,000. So if he did not fill out a form within the year, which is what it says here in this document, under penalties, there are civil penalties for failure to file a correct Form 8300 by the date it is due and provide the required statement to those named in the Form 8300. If you intentionally disregard the requirement to file a correct Form 8300 by the date it is due, the penalty is the greater of $25,000 or the amount of cash you received and were required to report, up to $100,000. Well, Craig Diamond, the check that he got was $380,000.
Yeah, I think it should be 25,000 into 300 and whatever. That would be at least 12 felonies. For each 25,000 chunk, make that another felony. I think we could put him away for the rest of his life. You know what? It just occurred to me. If he did file a 8300 form and you put in a FOIA to the Franchise Tax Board, it may just give you his address, not his fake business address, his real address.
Well, the thing
Because he might have waited till the end of the year.
No, Mr. Diamond is very clever. In fact, Mr. Diamond has sold off old property and has reinvested it. So he's moving his assets around. And then they're also using trust to move things, so it's not so apparent in the public's eyes. So there's a case called Assumption versus Superior Court. That's kind of like the mirror of what Mr. Diamond's doing, along with his crony partners who are helping in different capacities in moving stolen properties and identities.
You know that Mr. Spitzer is on the county supervisors you spoke to that one day?
Yes.
He promised to talk to you. He never had that talk with you, did he?
No, Mr. Spitzer has not made the time to speak with me. In fact, I tried to make an attempt to contact his office, and I spoke with his assistant. And his assistant basically just brushed me off completely. Didn't want to have anything to do with me. In fact, he made the comment that there's nothing we can do for you, and basically just close the phone.
Well, that adds another question I have for Mr. Spitzer, who tentatively agreed to do an interview with me, and I caught him at the Decry case where he made an appearance. You remember Mr. Decry, who killed 8 people because he couldn't have 100% custody of his only child. And I talked to him before we went into that courtroom. I have another question to ask you, Mr. Spitzer. I'm not saying you aren't better than Tony racketeering Rackauckus, but this is another question. Why didn't you keep? I mean, I was there. I was a witness. I was in the gallery at the supervisor. He said he'd meet with you. I think he said he would meet with you within a week.
He
never called you.
He made the promise, and he never followed up. He never kept his promise.
That was what, a year ago?
It's probably been close to 2.
2 years. I'm just wondering, Mr. Spitzer, on my soapbox again, Mr. Spitzer of Orange County running against Tony Rackauckus, the rat, as I call him, probably the face of the 5-city syndicate of New York City, Tony Rackauckus, that Tony Rackauckus. I'm just asking you, Mr. Spitzer, are you going to be another Tony Rackauckus who doesn't keep his word? Cindy's been waiting to get some justice here for 12 years. You said you would meet with her. I heard you. So did a couple dozen other people. So it's up to you, Mr. Spitzer. Either you're a man of your word, or maybe you're just another Tony Rackauckus who wants to get in the gravy train of all the money going under the table. I just throw it out there. Leave it up to you to keep your word or not keep your word, Mr. Spitzer. Tony Rackauckus, you should have filed charges and had a warrant out for Craig Ronald Diamond a long time ago. Long time ago.
You know that's really sad about this?
Shame on you, Tony.
There are 7, if you actually Google this person's name or the company, Private Funding Partners, you'll find that there were 7 investors that were damaged by this person. 6 of the cases have already received their disposition judgments against Craig Ronald Diamond. Who do you think's the only one that hasn't received any justice out of this? So I feel kind of slayed here because I feel like I'm the sacrificial lamb that's basically paying off all of the other 6 investors. And it's pretty clear that, you know, justice is not going to be served for me.
It does not seem as if they're interested in justice in Orange County, from my observation. And again, if you just tuned in, I've been at least at 3 hearings of Cindy Brown's, because I can remember 3 different sets of attorneys appearing against her, none of which filed a substitution. And, you know, that should be an automatic loss when an experienced law firm like Steele's, LLC, at, 30 Corporate Way in Irvine?
30 Corporate Park.
Yeah, and we actually went there and knocked on the door and asked if they would do an interview. No, they said, call our number and make an appointment. Really? I'm right outside your door. Do I need to go home, call and come back? I think they really just didn't want to do an interview. But
Well, interesting that
people like Steele and Company are the reason why me and millions of Americans have lost all respect for attorneys. They're just a millimeter above scumbag thugs. You know, they're just legal thugs, thugging. And she's been.
And
Go ahead.
their business professions code says that under 6068 that moral turpitude is not going to be easily just turned away from. They really are supposed to uphold the law and to protect justice. And here, when you talk about the level of corruption and the fraud in the documents, they just willingly just put it right there in the record. No problem. But there's never a plaintiff that ever comes into the court.
You've raised that issue at least all 3 times I've been there. So crooked Judge Stafford, Timmy, why are you so timid? Timothy the Timid Stafford. You ought to just say, hey, I see the fraud. I'm stopping the fraud. She gets her house. Give her 25 grand back. We're done here. Have a nice day. And let the banks do whatever the banks want to do. But they lost this one. They just don't want to lose. It's like they just keep throwing attorneys and throwing attorneys and throwing attorneys. You must have cost them by now probably $50,000, $100,000 on attorney's fees.
Oh, a lot more than that. That's why they flattened my tire.
Oh,
Don't
probably.
forget that.
I did forget that. I'm glad you reminded me. Yeah, flattening her tires is not playing cricket. You're supposed to file a motion with the court saying, "Dear Judge, may I please flatten Cindy's tires," and get court approval. You didn't bother. You just went and flattened her tires. But let's show all these documents one more time. Just flash them up there, Stephen. One at a time. Everything we've put out there. Let's just show them all again. One at a time. Take it up and then take it down so they all get scanned on there. This is a crime. This is white-collar crime at its finest, people. And the courts are themselves, at least Judge Stafford and several others I know, like Judge Stewart in Burbank, are cooperating in the crime. They're actually aiding and abetting. This is a RICO in progress. Would you agree, Cindy Brown?
Yes, because they're basically penalizing a person who is a victim of identity theft. They've asked the victim to post a bond in which they're trying to take a house, the last asset, from the victim. And now the banks have progressed on taking money, taking assets, and now the largest asset left. And then to place a bond, in addition, just the final kill.
If there's anybody out there that would like to donate money to cover the cost, because it's 200 miles for me to go down there with a film crew, I think we need to start filming down there more often. Give me a call, 805-928-1100. I just have to throw that out there. And because Ted Visner made an appearance from the jail in Bay City, Michigan today, I'm going to need to raise some money to send a film crew there. We need to put a camera in that courtroom, and if they disallow the camera, we may have to take it up on appeal to SCOTUS. Because when people are set up, and the state has changed the law to legalize medical marijuana, cops should not be setting him up, then setting up his wife, Danny Austin, arresting her. They thought they could steal her child. But shit, I talked to her just before we went on the air tonight. She already had figured out they might pull this stunt sometime. So she had the child with an already approved guardian. So the child was not in any danger of being snapped up and thrown into the foster. That's what they did with her earlier children. And they did it to Ted. They took a house away. I mean, you saw Ted, but what you didn't know, unless you watch my show religiously, which I know most of you are a little lax, you you only tune in when you're bored, because corporate TV is really boring these days, in my humble opinion. Ted was building this huge house, and I've got it up on YouTube, and I went there. I went to Michigan, and I filmed his huge. It was to help women who are being beaten up by husbands or boyfriends, and they needed a safe shelter, and the bank had made them a loan. And then they said, oh, you've completed your building. No, he hadn't. There was basically no drywall in most of the inside. He didn't quite have the roof finished. Some of the windows weren't in. It was far from finished. Any builder knows that most of the money is in the finishing, getting the rough shell up. You know, that's about 20%. But the 80% of the building cost is the interior finishing. And they foreclosed and took the house away, refused to extend his loan. And then the crooked judge in Isabella County, I'm not mentioning your name tonight, Judge, you're lucky, in their privately owned courthouse, decided to hammer Ted and hammer Ted and hammer Ted and let the bank take that house. And it wasn't even for Ted. It was a shelter for women out away from all the cities where it'd be difficult to find these women, where they could be safe. What's wrong with having a safe, privately run home for women that are trying to, this is what Ted was trying to do. So he wasn't, when he mentioned Isabella County, he wasn't talking about some drug busting. It had nothing to do with drugs. Nothing at all. It had to do with building a safe shelter. If there's anybody out there that wants to donate money, go look at my Facebook in about 2 days. It's William J. Wagener, or William Wagener, Wagener. Look at my Facebook. I'll set it. I don't know how to do it. I'm going to have Stephen, somebody set it up for me. But we'll set up a donation page. You can donate so I can go cover Cindy's case, or donate so I can go see the Bundys, or donate so I can cover Ted Visner's, because these cases cost money to put camera and people on the ground. You may have noticed in tonight's whole show, you didn't see a single commercial, because I don't want to be threatened with removal of commercials if I touch on somebody's toes. You may have noticed I've stomped on a few toes. Barbara Beck, Diane Hall, Tom Mesereau are now, 2 years dead, 3 years he's been dead, and God, do justice with his corpse. Thomas Snedden, who mercilessly forged fake evidence against Michael Jackson. And I invited him on the show 3 times. He never responded to one letter. And he died a very painful form of cancer. I'm talking about Thomas Snedden, our former Santa Barbara district attorney. Couldn't have happened to a nicer person. The cancer, I mean, to Tom Snedden. What he did to Michael Jackson for almost 2 years was just abominable. And Michael should have come back and sued the county and just sued them for millions and millions. The county wasted $20 million, in case you're new to Santa Barbara County and you're watching the show for only the second or third time. We wasted $20 million, and this county won't admit it. What they did is they had a congressman go to Congress and get $20 million road improvement grant. That's how they finally balanced the county budget. And when I wrote to the county and said how much they wouldn't tell me. They just refused to tell you how much was wasted on the Michael Jackson trial. So all that said, if you want to donate money for me to get the film crew out to cover Ted Visner's crucifixion in Bay City, Michigan, which is about 2,500 miles or more from here, go to my Facebook page. Go to my Facebook page. Ted is a good guy. He's didn't go into raising medical marijuana because he wants to get high. Because he is growing enough there to make $500,000. That's way more than one person needs to get high. He's just trying to help medical patients. That's what Ted's trying to do. He's trying to help medical patients get what they need because the state is playing this funny game where they sort of legalize medical marijuana in Michigan, but yet they'll go out and arrest you. And like Ted said, he sent them a letter. He wrote them a letter and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. Just putting you on notice, trying to comply with all the laws and letting you know. And their reaction was to fly over with helicopters, document it, and then send 2 guys in with fake IDs, fake medical marijuana permits, and then arrest him. Just crazy. There's a shot of Ted Wagener from an earlier time.
That's on YouTube.
And that's on YouTube. What's the title of that in case people want to look it up? I can't read it from here.
Ted Wagener interview from jail with William Wagener.
Oh yeah, that's right. I did another interview when he was temporarily in jail for 3 days or something on that Isabella County. Ted, it's called again what?
Ted Wagener
Ted Wagener interview from jail with William Wagener. So I won't deny that Ted probably pushes the envelope of the law, but I got to tell you, do you think Thomas Jefferson was a hood, was a criminal? Any people think Thomas Jefferson, who is credited with writing most of the U.S. Constitution, was he a criminal? Was he a criminal, Thomas Jefferson? Because he used to snort stuff that's illegal today under the illegal substances stuff. That's a fact. He used to invite the gentlemen to dinner and then say they'd go into the drawing room and snort this stuff. How do we know that? You're saying, well, William, how could you know what he was doing 200 some years ago? Because everything was shipped to Montebello. I think it was Monticello. Monticello was his place. And they had shipping manifests. And they still have those shipping manifests because Jefferson kept very good records. That's why we know. Also, there's letters about, sitting in the parlor with Thomas Jefferson, friends, and they do their snorting. And he was a founding father. Now, I hate the smell of marijuana, medical or any other kind. I don't like the smell. It brings back memories of Vietnam and everybody around me, except me, everybody around me smoking it. And I don't like it. But it ought to be absolutely legal as it was for centuries in this country. It was only that crazy guy named Richard Milhous Nixon who was part of the conspiracy to kill President JFK. He was at that meeting the night before, along with LBJ. See, the murder of JFK, I'm sorry I'm taking Cindy's time again. We'll be right back to Cindy in a minute. Nixon, Hoover, George Herbert Walker Bush, Clerk Murchison, and about another half dozen people, including Nixon, were at that meeting, the conspiracy meeting, and they were all like, yep, tomorrow we're done with JFK and in with LBJ, because LBJ will boost the Vietnam War, which will run up the national debt, which helps the bankers, because it runs up the national debt. That's what mainly it was all about. Yeah, Clinton Murchison wanted to sell oil to the military, and the military-industrial complex wanted to make more guns and bombs and helicopter blades and all that stuff. But to the people in charge, it was the bank gangsters. The same people who are pushing as hard as they can to get us into a war with North Korea. Really? North Korea, this little tiny peep-squeak country, might be able to throw one missile, which we'll shoot down 3 times before it gets anywhere near the coast of Alaska or California. This reminds me of that play I was in high school. It was called The Mouse That Roared. This is what this is, The Mouse That Roared. I wouldn't be surprised if Obama gave them a nuclear missile just so the mouse could roar. Why do I say that? Because we know, and this is, Republicans don't like to say this, I'm not just anti-Democrat, I'm anti-corruption. But under President Ronald Reagan, when George Herbert Walker Bush was vice president, under that presidency, after Reagan had been shot and Bush was kind of running the White House, the American government, people, our government that you're going to pay taxes to in a few more months, our government gave communist China the multiple deployment warhead technology. Yep. In the same year we gave it to them, like, here's a present, communist China. The same year, earlier in the year, 3 American businessmen were arrested for trying to do exactly that. But our government was doing it anyway. They didn't want these entrepreneurs to give away the technology. You don't believe that? Just go back to the 1980s and do your research. It's there. The names of the guys that went to jail, and I think it was Nixon at the time. I think it was Nixon. It was in the 80s, but Nixon was the special emissary that went over to communist China, supposedly to smooth things over. What he was really doing is giving the multiple nuclear warhead technology to communist China. So it wouldn't surprise me if Obama gave North Korea a bomb. Said, here's the technology, guys, here it is. Maybe didn't give them the whole bomb, just some leftover parts from one of our obsolete bombs. They just need the news so we can all be afraid. It's all about making you be afraid. You know what? Every time God sent a messenger to Abraham or one of the old ancient prophets, the first words out of their mouth is, fear not. I have good tidings from the Lord God. But under the regime we're living under, it's fear, fear, be afraid. The mouse is going to roar. You know what? There's a bunch of Air Force guys on permanent patrol over that way. If they fired a missile, that little fat teenage dictator of North Korea, boom, he would be toast like within minutes. I'm sorry, I'm doing my thing again. I shouldn't do. Cindy, did we miss something? We got to get on the right. Back to Cindy. She's sitting here so patiently. Let me shoot my mouth off because you came a long way.
No,
What
I
else?
think we really covered it. That's just kind of the icing on the cake with having lost at the UD court and setting up for the appeal and then trying to stay in position or possession of the property while in the appeal. That 8300 form could have been very dangerous.
Yeah, it was. And it's clear to me, you won't say it, but they were trying to set you up for a criminal arrest. That's all they needed. Just say, oh, wait a minute, you lost that appeal. In fact, they could just say, we think you lost the appeal. That's why we're arresting you today for not paying the rest of the bail.
Well, that's interesting you say that because right now we're trying to get all of the waivers and get the designation of the records together. And that's not finalized because I don't think they expected the bond to come in. Now that the bond is in, they have to contact all the court reporters and get all the waiver forms and all the fees in, and then that will determine if the appeal will go forward. Because normally it doesn't. The appeal, it's very difficult to get past the designation of record.
You're almost there.
Well, I've complete everything on my end. Now we're just waiting for the bond. The bond is in. Now we have to wait for the court reporters. And then once they've issued that, then the opening brief and everything else will follow. But
I need money, people, to cover this. I need to put a camera down there, and I don't expect my camera people to work because it's the right thing to do. They need to get paid. And this is the first time I've ever asked anybody to donate. In 17 years of doing this show, I don't think I've ever before asked. But Ted Visner's case needs to see some coverage. And you can be sure ABC, CNN, Fox News aren't going to cover Ted Visner. I will, as we did tonight. And they're probably not going to cover Cindy. We thought the Orange County Register was going to cover Cindy's. I think they did a little mention of something once, didn't they?
not really. In fact,
There's a little blurb.
There was actually Eugene Fields did a pretty good article back in the Register back in the day. Probably a little bit premature before we found out about the foreclosure debacle. Now that the foreclosure, how should we call it, issue, they're trying to make it seem like it's gone away. It really hasn't. It's going on its next phase. I mean, they're just doing a community sweep right now.
I like that community sweep.
Oh yeah.
By the way, she lives in a little village in Orange County that's not part of Anaheim. And the sheriffs are the designated city police for her community. And as I drove through that community, which I've done now, a half a dozen times, and I went down to their water board one time just to say, why did you drown her lawn, run up her water bill? And the guy in charge went out the back door as I was coming in, because I called him at first and said, is so-and-so there? I'm William Wagener. I do a television show. I'd like to interview him. I get there, and she said, oh, I'm sorry, just left. There he goes, out the driveway.
There you go.
So, well, when will he be back? Oh, I don't know. Probably 3 or 4 hours.
That's what happens over at the county recorder's office too, when you bring in very questionable documents where you want them to be reviewed and inspected, out the back door. They don't want to address these issues because they know something's definitely wrong, but they don't want to fix it.
They don't want to fix it, and they don't want their fingerprints on it, so that they can later be said, well, didn't you review these documents? Isn't it your job to make sure the documents are legitimate? I don't know anything
about it.
I don't see anything, don't hear anything, I'm not going to speak anything.
But isn't that what the elected official that sits on the board of supervisors, he's supposed to be the oversight over
Not
the
only
documents?
Spitzer, but the other 4 supervisors, they should be looking at this. There
Right.
should be a full-blown investigation.
Right.
And the supervisors, in case you didn't know it, Mr. Spitzer, shh, don't tell anybody else, Mr. Spitzer. In case you didn't know it, as supervisors, you can appoint a special attorney to investigate. You don't have to go through the Orange County DA. You don't have to go through the Orange County Sheriff, the last one of which went to prison. And I think the current one, Miss Hutchins, is going to go to prison. You know, we had our sheriff on my show here about 15 years ago, our local sheriff. And I said to him, right before we went live, I said, Sheriff Jim, your buddy down there in Orange County is in deep trouble. He's in deep trouble. And he's like, what? Don't know anything about it. What? And he said, okay, we're going on air in 1 minute. Here we roll. And I didn't embarrass him on camera, but I knew things that I can't tell you how I know. But look at the exhibit Cindy has got going here. Look at this. This is just part of what she has to go through and has to submit. And, you know, my hat is literally off to Cindy Brown tonight, because most people would give up, walk away from the house and say, well, I got schnookered. They tried to schnooker the wrong woman, because this woman isn't just any Cindy Brown. This woman, how many points did you make in that one game in the Olympics? How many of the total?
No, that was in college.
Oh, that college?
The 60.
How many points?
60.
60 points. Choo. You think you're going to beat her? Judge Stafford, what are you thinking, sir? What are you thinking? Now, I can't call you Schmuck in your courtroom, but this is my courtroom. See, that's the difference. You can deny my media request in your courtroom, and one of these days I just might run it up to SCOTUS. Just might. People, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Cindy Brown deserves a better shake than she's been getting. That's why she's here with us live tonight. And Ted Wiesner at least deserves to tell his side of it. They've hit him with over a dozen felonies for growing medical marijuana. Now, this happened in California here too, about 15 years ago. And they arrested people who were growing medical marijuana only for people who had the medical card. And I have the film somewhere, but it was a long time ago. I drove way out in back county. They were way back, and they went out of their way to arrest these people. It's time to end the war on marijuana, at least. Other exotic drugs, I don't know, maybe some of them should be, But absolutely, every cop, before he goes on duty, they should take a blood sample to make sure he's not on marijuana, he's not on speed, he's not on something. And this is not an insult to the cops, but they have a very stressful job. And I could see after doing a few beers, if they confiscated some marijuana and find, oh, we just have a little marijuana left in the trunk. Maybe we'll roll some, puff a few, ingest them some whatever way. I can see where a cop would say, why don't we try it? But judges absolutely should be tested for drugs every week. And they shouldn't tell them what day they're getting tested. Because I've seen some judges on the bench that I think were totally stoned. In fact, in this county, in this city, there was a judge. His name was Michael, well, it doesn't matter, but his first name was Michael. And he was arrested for snorting cocaine or something like cocaine in his chambers right before he came out in court and put some poor working stiff like a welder in jail for 5 years for doing just what the judge has done. And the judge here in the county jail, and now they've given him back his bar card. How honorable of the Bar Association. When are we going to terminate the Bar Association in that criminal mafia of the legal profession? Anyway, we have some music for you. I thank you for tuning in. You can catch us on YouTube in about 48 hours. Please go investigate President Kennedy's, because the same crooks that killed him are still running America. Thanks for watching. I'm William Wagener with Cindy Brown live in the studio, and Ted Visner, who called in from the Bay City County Jail in Michigan. Thanks for watching. We're going to close with some music. I hope you enjoy it.
Disagree on that. We just happen to have the
See you next week.
retired chief of police from the city of Burbank, and that's Glenn Doyle back here. So stand up, Glenn, and thanks for all you did for us. So you two can have fun in retirement. In talking about retirement and older people, we now would like to perform a piece called Themes Like Old Times. And you've all heard those stories that you're getting old when. Well, my very favorite of all of those is you're getting old when you see a pretty girl walk by and your pacemaker opens the garage door. So this is Themes Like Old Times. Are there any boys in the crowd? Any more? Okay, well, right now we're going to have famous John Philip Sousa march, Semper Fi, just for you. Thanks.